Good to see everyone. Good to see Brother Worley. He's able to make it. Genesis chapter 7. That should tell you something right there. Genesis chapter 7, I'm going to start reading in verse 17 to the end of the chapter. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. And the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. And all the flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beast, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land, died. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. That's 5 months. That's a long time. You know, when you read these verses, even going back to chapter 6, to chapter 8, you know, a lot of people believe that this is nothing but a tall tale, just a fable. It's not true. It makes for a good story to tell your children, but it's not real. Well, there's a number of problems with that. First and foremost, God's holy word says it's real. It's never been proven wrong. No other book has been attacked more than the book of Genesis. Reason is simple to understand. If you can prove that Genesis is false, then the rest of the Bible, which stands on Genesis, which are the other chapters, Old and New, they fall as well. But of course, there's other reasons to believe that this actually took place. We don't always realize it, but they're all around us. Archaeologists have proven throughout the globe that there was a great flood. Some people believe that yes, there was a flood, but it was just in one valley, say the Mesopotamian valley, but not the rest of the world. Well, archaeology doesn't agree with that. The Bible doesn't agree with that. The other thing is geology. Geology proves that there was a great flood in a numerous amount of ways. Plus, there's all the accounts of civilizations from China to Spain and in between, long before they were China and Spain. Howard Voss, a noted archaeologist, he states on all continents and among almost all peoples of the earth, they have this same story. Same story about a large vessel being created, destruction brought upon the world, and this one family escaped. A lot of them state that the destruction came because of God, that brought it upon the world. Anthropologists who study the cultures of all the people on the planet, they have collected somewhere between 250 to 300 of these accounts on all the different continents. Not just one or two. Every continent has stories like this, accounts of this, that have been handed down from all of these years. All of these years. So, what do we know about the ark? I mean, what do we really know about this vessel? What does man know about the ark? Very little. Are the artist's renderings of the ark, are they correct? And when we think of artist renderings of something that took place thousands of years ago, are they ever correct? No, not even close. Was the flood as destructive as the scriptures point out that it was? Or was it just local? Was it just a hard rain for 40 days and for 40 nights? Well, the Bible doesn't teach that. So is it truth or is it fiction? Was it a localized flood or was it universal? When we think about the size of the ark alone, just the size of the ark, if we didn't go anywhere else, it will tell anyone with any reasonable amount of intelligence it had to be universal. It had to be global. Why build a structure this large if it was just in one valley? In Genesis chapter 6, verses 14 through 16, describes the ark. Well, just think about that word ark. Look it up. The definition is a box. The definition is a chest. What box, what chest has a bow or a stern? Ships do, but ships are going from one place to the other. All this vessel had to do was float, just bob up and down in the water. In the immensity of this structure, some have stated would have been able to withstand somewhere around 200 feet waves. So they were safe. It talks about the 3 floors, talks about that door on the side. They were to pitch it from within and from without, for their, of course, their own protection. But the length of it, as it states in these verses, was 300 cubits. Well, the width was 50 cubits. The height was 30 cubits. Okay, what's a cubit? Depends upon what you read. Most believe the cubit is measured from your elbow to your middle finger. Well, mine's 19 inches. But the general minimum measurement is 18. Then there's the royal cubit. Those could be anywhere from 20 to 22 inches. But most people look at it as just 18. But understand, it could have been even more. I'm just not sure. But even if it was just 18 inches, 300 cubits, that would have been 450 feet long. Now, you folks who are football fans, you know that a football field, the playing part of it, not the end zones, is 100 yards. That's 300. So think of a vessel that would have been, from beginning to end, this large chest, 1.5 football fields long. That's huge. I mean, it really is. And a lot of reasons why people believe that they could not have created this all the way back then is because they were a bunch of cavemen anyway. Well, they're idiots. They don't accept the truth. And you know, when people will say, there's no way that they could have created, well, they created the pyramids and a lot of other things. They were able to do that. So the width, knowing this, in the cubits, just 18 inches, would have been 75 feet wide. The height would have been around 45, and it could have been even more. You know, we generally rule stories as 10 feet. Go downtown, find a tall building, stand below it and look up 4.5 stories. That was a big boat. That was a big vessel. very tall, very wide, very long. 3 stories with rooms on every level. You can call them cubicles if you want. A section at the top, about a cubit, that would allow light in and air in. My guess is Noah and his family, they lived on that top section for a reason. Fresh air. But the light would be up there as well. So a lot of ventilation. Again, a large door constructed on the side that will allow the animals to come in and then depart with them as well. You know, these are measurements of a large steel ocean-going vessel. That's what these measurements are. And it's interesting that the first time one was actually constructed this large was 1884. That's a few years after the ark was constructed. That's the first vessel that they were able to construct. Now, detractors will argue there's not enough space on this box or this chest for all of those animals. Well, ask them, do you know what the measurements are? You know what the standard answer is? No. You know why? They didn't care to find out. So they've not done the math to begin with. They just don't accept it because they don't want to accept it. Most of them are atheists or evolutionists, one and the same. So there's basically approximately 100,000 square feet of space on this box, this chest. Most have come to the conclusion that this would equal out to 1,500,000 cubic feet. That's a big house. That's a huge house. It's a big boat. Huge. So, not enough room? There's enough room. There's enough room for all of these animals. There's enough room for Noah and his family. There had been enough room for all the food sources for all of the animals and for Noah and his family, and probably some other things left over. My guess being they were human, they probably brought some things from home onto that ark. Some wife probably told them, you have to do this. There would have been room for that as well. The other thing is people will say, well, how could 4 men construct a vessel this big at this period of time? Who says 4? Now, there were 4 men and their wives who went into the ark, but it doesn't say anything about how many actually created it. Could he have had help? Could he have hired help? Well, why not? Plus, they had 120 years to build it as well. That's a rather long time. In Genesis chapter 6, turn back to that chapter for a second. Read verses 18 and following with me. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female, of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind. 2 of every sort shall come unto thee to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. Individuals who've done a whole lot more study on this than I have stated there would have been plenty of room left over. Plenty of room left over. First of all, when we think about all of the animals, you can exclude marine life. The fish, the whales, the dolphins, porpoises, all ocean-going animals, they would have survived outside of the ark if they made it through that flood and the waters receding. So they would have been okay. They definitely wouldn't have come onto the ark. Then you take about the measurements of all the animals. Not all were large. You think about the size of a parakeet or a sparrow or a hummingbird, things like that. Going all the way to the larger animals, let's say even the elephants, the giraffes. How many elephants and giraffes? Just two, just male and female. Does it mean that they had to be full grown? No, it doesn't really. But even if they were. And what about dinosaurs, as someone was asking earlier? Were there dinosaurs on the ark? Well, they existed that period of time. Why wouldn't they have been on the ark? Did they have to be full grown? Not necessarily. And by the way, after the flood, those dinosaurs slowly just deceased. They didn't have the food source like they had to before. So the overall size that people have studied this, and they've come up with the average size from the small creature, you think of that hummingbird to even a full-grown elephant, was the size of a sheep. You can store a lot of sheep on a vessel that large. Matter of fact, they have come to the conclusion that the capacity of this vessel being so large would equal anywhere from 550 to 600 locomotive boxcars. That's a lot of cars. When I lived in Wyoming, you would see these coal cars going back east, and they would went on forever. You couldn't see where one began and the other one would end, and that would be nothing compared to, say, 600. Question arises, what about all the different species? For example, the dog. You know how many species of dogs there are? I looked it up. There's around 450 species of dogs. Cats, all the other animals. Does that mean there had to be 450 dogs? No. Just two, male and female. Notice Moses uses the word kind. He doesn't use the word species as we use it today. Would it be possible that of these two dogs that would reproduce, and those would reproduce after those and continuing on down for 1,000 years, that within the genetics of those dogs were all the species that you see today? Why not? If not, why not? Of all of these animals, how long did it take for Noah to herd them to come to him? You know, they say he had to go out and get them. But the passage that we just read, verse 20, states that they all came to him. How could that be? God made it happen. That's how it was. So if the flood was not universal, if it was just local, why build a vessel this large? Seriously. Why have all of the animals from around the globe come there? Why do that? And why take 120 years when, if it was just in that valley, some people say, why don't you go to the next valley over? You're safe then. That doesn't make much sense though, does it? Knowing how water rises and knowing floods, it would have found its way throughout the whole world eventually, and it did. So the size of the ark tells us that it was a universal flood. But also, the flood itself proves that it was universal It wasn't just local. How many people, you ever wonder how many people were on the planet when the flood came? There's one number that keeps coming up, and that's 1,656 years between the creation and the flood. It's interesting that so many state that same number. They have devised, through, the genealogical records, that about a period of 1,656 years had passed. How many people? That's a lot of people. We may think, well, there was probably maybe a couple 100,000, maybe 1 million. Well, they have devised, through this period of time, these years, from those genealogical records, and the span of life that these individuals lived during this time, Methuselah, 969 years. Would he have had a lot of kids? Probably so. But even, and the number shows up as 1.3, if every family only had 1.3 children, and that's the minimum, they believe that there would have been at least 1 billion people on the planet at this time. Some have surmised even more than that. That's a lot of folks. And they stayed just in that one valley. Well, that's kind of dumb to think that too. Knowing people. No, they were going to move. Always looking for better ground, better property. There's the old saying that the other night it just rained cats and dogs. It didn't rain cats and dogs. Brother Cates referred to it as raining elephants and dinosaurs. Unbelievable amount of water that fell for 40 days, for 40 nights. Now remember, there was no rain up to this period of time. It was just a mist upon the ground. This was very tropical. Adam and Eve, when they were created, they didn't have any clothes. They didn't need any clothes. And you think about the vegetation that would have sustained a lot of animal life that it would not have been able to sustain after the flood. But it also states, chapter 7, verse 11 and 12, all the fountains of the deep broke open. So you had vast amounts of moisture, rain falling, but also moisture rising. It's interesting. It hasn't been long when scientists finally came to the conclusion that there is more water under the crust than above it. Like 3 to 1. From the great state of Nebraska, this is underwater water, aquifer. It goes from Nebraska through Kansas, through Oklahoma, and even into Texas. An amazing amount of water. Farmers have used this for years, ranchers as well. They can drill down and get this water. But there is almost a sea underneath the crust. So 3 to 1, they believe there's more water underneath the crust than above it. So you have all of this happening at one time. They believe, and we have heard, that there was probably something like a canopy over the earth that all this moisture would have fell from. Again, they'd never seen rain until this point. Not as far as we know. With that canopy being removed, we can't imagine how much water fell in those 40 days. And the water rising. But there's another area, and that's from volcanoes. You think of the destruction of volcanoes. And you think about the blast, but you think about all the debris, not just water, but the mud that would come down through it as well. Geologists have learned from Mount St. Helens that they had to redo the math. You see, they believe that the Grand Canyon took millions of years to create. Well, they have a small Grand Canyon at the foot of Mount St. Helens, where you have all these layers of silt and rock became rock. It didn't take millions of years, it took a couple of days when this water came out of that volcano that day. And that's just one volcano. Mount Etna in Sicily, still active. It seems to erupt all the time. But back in the 40s, it produced 4,600,000 gallons of water. That was one day. And this lasted for 100 days. You know what the erosion would have been like? You know what the erosion was at Mount St. Helens? All the forest was gone, knocked down. Below that mountain was just a complete drop-off, like you'd think of mountains. It was filled in about 500 feet above what it had been by all of this silt and all of this mud that flowed down. 500 feet. This was from a geologist who came out and studied it, and him and another individuals were walking around and talking about it, and it looked like they were in the Grand Canyon, smaller version. Millions of years, it was days that it took place. So why do they go with millions of years? Because they're evolutionists. They have to lie, cheat, and steal to try and prove their point, and they can't even do that. So the Great Flood and the runoff from it, without a doubt, could have created the Grand Canyon. You think of the storm surge. You remember Katrina? Remember what it did to Biloxi and New Orleans and Gulfport? Just before it hit, my dad left. He got out of town where he was living. That whole first floor was submerged from the storm surge. You can drive down that. I haven't been for a number of years, but there are places where houses used to be. There's just concrete slabs now because of the storm surge. You think about what happened in North Carolina with the hurricane. What took place in Texas recently? The storm surge. In no time it took place, and it killed so many people because there was no warning. You think that was bad, and it was. Think about it globally, happening all at once. This one geologist made the point, the old saying, the present is the key to the past. Then he went on to state, to clarify actually, he said, actually the catastrophic events of the present are the keys to the past catastrophic events like the flood. And they're everywhere. You can see on almost every continent, if not on every continent, some form of a cataclysmic flood that affected the earth. And it's all around us. You know, the evidence is there. God's given the evidence. If they want to believe in His Word, it's there, just looking around, but people don't want to. This was destruction like the world had never seen or since. Talks about all the high hills and the mountains were covered over completely in chapter 7, 19 and 20. 15 cubits above the highest point. That's 22 and a half feet above the highest peak. I don't think this is going out on a limb, but after the flood, when the waters began to recede like nobody's business, Did the earth shift? Yeah, it shifted. Still is to some degree. But in some places, did it lower? You know, you've got a muddy field. You step into that muddy field, it sinks. But what does the land around it do? It rises up. I think when you think about the Alps today, or the Rocky Mountains, or the Himalayas, they probably were not even close to being as tall as they are now. And evolution, yeah, that's it. Evolution. One of the reasons why we find these marine fossils on the tops of these mountains is because of the flood. Now, how does animal life, how does vegetation, how does it fossilize? Evolutionists will like to tell us that is because it took millions of years. It doesn't. That's just an out and outright lie. There's a difference between science and evolution. Evolution isn't a science to begin with, but that's another story. Fossils are formed when these animals or in these plant lives are buried rapidly, very quickly, with significant force, buried in the silt, buried in mud. And over the years, you see the outline of these fish, or plant life, or other animal life, other organisms. Whitcomb and Morris, who authored the book, The Genesis Flood, Whitcomb wrote about the fossilized fish that you could find. Since sedimentary rock is very often preserved with all of its bones intact. You can see the outline of the fish. I saw one the other day. It showed a fish that was in the process of swallowing another fish. When it died, it became fossilized. What can do that? That amount of pressure. Water can. The flood could do that. The flood did that. But he went on to state that entire shoals of fish over large areas, numbering billions of specimens, and they have found a lot of them there in the Grand Canyon, are found even in a state of agony with no mark of a scavenger's attack. And you can see the outline of the fish. It's not comfortable at all. And the water stayed that way for 150 days. That's 5 months. You think if someone, doubtful, but if someone did survive maybe that first day, holding on to a tree, was he going to be able to do that for 5 months? Of course not. As there was no survivors outside of the ark, there's no survivors outside of the church. Preached on that a while back. No salvation. When once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water, the like figure whereunto even baptism does also now save us. 1 Peter 3, 20 and 21. Tremendous erosion from this flood. The devastation of it. Talked about the devastation of Mount St. Helens. They learned so much from this event, geologists have, of how quickly it took place. It did not take place over millions of years. It took place in a matter of days. That's the force of all these waters. And you think about the crust rising in certain places and the crust lowering in other places. You know what the runoff would have been like? Just devastating. No life would have survived. None whatsoever. There was a flood in one of the canyons of Colorado back in the 70s. Call it the Big Thompson Flood. It happened so quick because of rainfall. And you see about this and hear things in Arizona as well. The rain fell so hard in a short period of time that there was a flood going down this valley. Animal life, human life, cars, houses, completely swept away, and they had absolutely no notice whatsoever. And the flood, that would have been even worse, much worse. If the flood was local, why do you see the rainbow in the skies? I mean, you see the rainbows here. You also see them in Wyoming. You see them in Colorado. You see them in Africa, Asia. I mean, if it was local, wouldn't it just be over that area? Makes sense. And it shall come to pass, when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the water shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. Genesis 9, 14 and 15. We talked about a little of that before. You see that bow, that's God saying, don't worry. And you see it everywhere. Last point, God's word proves it was a worldwide flood. That really does begin the discussion, and it ends it. Jesus himself spoke of the flood as a worldwide judgment. We talked about this in Matthew chapter 24, verses 37 through 39. He stated, but as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. By the way, who closed that door? God did. He closed that door. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. When the Lord does return, there's not going to be any hints. Jesus is coming soon? Well, could be. He may not come around for another 1,000,000 years. Of course, this world hasn't been around 1,000,000 years, but that's another story as well. Peter knew it was worldwide. He, writing about God, spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness. In those 120 years, he was preaching. Bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, 2 Peter 2, verse 5. Later he would write, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished, but the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word are kept in store. For what? Reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men, 2 Peter 3, 6 and 7. The world before, that antediluvian world, destroyed by the flood. The world that we live in now and will continue until ever he returns, it will be destroyed by a nuclear war. You know how many people are afraid of that? Man's going to destroy the earth? Man's not going to destroy it. My mother told me that one years ago. It's going to be destroyed by God. This world, the stars, the universe, are all going to burn up one day. By the way, that means that some false teachers are saying that this world will continue as heaven. Well, good luck. Conclusion. Evidence of a universal, worldwide flood is found through archaeology. You know, they have dug in certain places and they get so deep, they're getting down into what is basically mud. Layers, feet of mud. and they dig below that, they can find another civilization, the one before the flood. This has been discovered throughout the world. Geology is evidence, proof of a worldwide flood. Didn't take place over millions of years. Took place in 40 days and 40 nights. You know, they were on that ark for a year, give or take. That's a long time. And God watched over them, spared them, protected them, because they were faithful. But horrible destruction, unimaginable destruction, man and beast. All the cities at that period of time ceased to exist. As destructive as it was, there is a greater one coming. There is a day, a judgment that is coming. As the song that we sometimes sing asks the question, are we ready for that day? Are we faithful to the Lord? Have we obeyed the gospel? If we are, we don't have to worry about anything. We will not cease to live. Physically we will, but who we are, our soul, our spirit, will continue to live. If we're faithful, it will be in a much, much better place. No tears in heaven, no tears in heaven. Are we prepared? Are we ready? If not, why not this afternoon as we all stand and sing?